The purple light of 3 suns filtered through the crystal dome of the Galactic University's xenobiology classroom. 24 students from 12 different species sat in their specially designed seats, each accommodation tailored to their unique physiology. The saurian students coiled their long tails beneath heat lamps, while the gaseous ethereals floated in containment fields that shimmered like soap bubbles. Professor Rath adjusted the neural interface crown on his blue-scaled head. As an Altarian, he had spent over 2 centuries studying the behavioral patterns of sentient species across the galaxy. His forearms moved with practiced precision as he activated the holographic display system. Today we examine the most fundamental survival instinct shared by all intelligent life, Professor Rath announced, his voice carrying the authority that came with publishing over 300 research papers, the domestication patterns that have shaped civilizations across known space. A 3-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared above the class, with thousands of star systems glowing in different colors. Each color represented a different species and their domestication achievements. Every species that has achieved space travel has followed the same logical progression, the professor continued. His lower left arm pointed to a cluster of green stars. The Verdani domesticated the 6-legged grass eaters of their homeworld. These creatures provided milk, transportation, and textile fibers. He gestured to another cluster, this one glowing orange. The Tecton people domesticated flying creatures that helped them navigate their mountainous world. These birds also ate the insects that destroyed their crops. A Mantari student, her compound eyes reflecting the holographic light, clicked her mandibles in agreement. Logical choices based on practical needs, she chittered through her translator device. Professor Rath's expression showed approval. Precisely, Student Kiva. Every domesticated creature serves a clear purpose. Food production, labor assistance, materials, or protection services. This is the universal constant. He manipulated the display to show creatures from dozens of worlds. Peaceful herbivores with large eyes and gentle dispositions. 6-legged pack animals built for endurance. Flying creatures with colorful plumage that had been bred for messaging services. Even the most alien-looking beings followed familiar patterns. They were all harmless to their domesticators. A crystalline quartzite student pulsed with soft light as she spoke. The energy cost of maintaining aggressive creatures would destabilize any civilization, she observed, her voice like wind chimes. It violates basic resource management principles. Another excellent point, Student Dana, Professor Rath said. Which brings us to our first universal law of domestication. The words appeared in glowing text above the hologram. No sentient species forms emotional bonds with predators. The ethereal student, whose name roughly translated to bright wind, flickered with curiosity. The risk assessment alone would prevent such behavior from evolving. Predators cannot be trusted. Professor Rath moved to the next slide, showing brain scans from various species. The neural pathways that create bonding responses are triggered by specific stimuli. Large eyes, soft textures, non-threatening postures. These features activate nurturing instincts because they signal safety and vulnerability. The hologram displayed creatures that looked remarkably similar, despite coming from different worlds. Round faces, forward-facing eyes, small mouths, soft fur or feathers. The universal appearance of creatures that inspired protective feelings across species lines. Notice the pattern, Professor Rath said. Large heads relative to body size indicating youth and dependency. Small teeth indicating herbivorous diet. Soft calls rather than aggressive sounds. Every domesticated creature across the galaxy shares these characteristics. A Saurian student raised her scaly hand. What about working partnerships? My people use hunter birds for fishing, but we do not form emotional attachments. An important distinction, Student Vera, the professor replied. Working relationships are transactional. The hunter bird receives food in exchange for its service. There is no emotional component. No grieving when the creature dies. No resources spent beyond practical necessity. He changed the display to show a timeline of domestication across different species. The pattern was identical everywhere. Cautious contact with useful creatures, gradual breeding programs, integration into society based on practical benefits. This brings us to our anomaly, Professor Rath said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. One species has violated every law we have established about domestication. One civilization has survived and thrived while completely ignoring the logical patterns that govern the rest of us. The hologram shifted to show a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. Species designation: human. Homeworld Earth. Current galactic threat level: unknown. Several students shifted uncomfortably. Humans had joined the Galactic Alliance only 50 years ago, but their reputation had spread quickly. They were friendly, curious, and generous. They were also completely unpredictable. The humans have domesticated creatures that should have driven them to extinction. Professor Rath continued. They form deep emotional bonds with animals that could kill them. They sacrifice resources to care for creatures that provide no practical benefit whatsoever. The display showed images that made several students recoil. Humans sitting peacefully beside creatures with massive teeth. Small human children playing with animals that outweighed them by hundreds of pounds. Adult humans crying over the graves of predators. This should not be possible, clicked the Mentari student. Such behavior would eliminate any species within generations. And yet, Professor Rath said, humans not only survived this seemingly suicidal behavior, they became the fastest-growing civilization in their sector. They went from primitive tool users to space travel in less than 12,000 years. Most species require 50,000 years or more. A heavy silence fell over the classroom. The implications were troubling. If humans had succeeded by breaking fundamental survival rules, what did that mean for everything they thought they knew about intelligence and evolution? Professor Rath saved the most disturbing image for last. A human female, no larger than most species juveniles, sleeping peacefully with her arm around a creature that could snap her neck with a single bite. The predator's eyes were closed, its expression almost protective. Tomorrow we will examine exactly what humans are doing with these creatures, the professor announced, and why their success terrifies every xenobiologist in the galaxy. As the students filed out of the classroom, their conversations were hushed and worried. Something about the human images had triggered deep, instinctual fears. The ethereal student flickered nervously as she passed the final hologram, still showing the sleeping human and her deadly companion. None of them slept well that night. In their dreams, they were no longer sure who was predator and who was prey. Rain pelted against the transparent aluminum windows of the university's research center. Inside, Class 9 gathered around individual study terminals, each one displaying classified files that had taken Professor Rath months to acquire from the Galactic Intelligence Division. What you are about to see may challenge your understanding of rational behavior, Professor Rath warned as he walked between the workstations, his forearms clasped behind his back in the way Altarians did when deeply concerned. These files document actual human-animal relationships observed by our field researchers. Student Kiva, the Mentari, opened her file first. The holographic display showed a four-legged creature with a pointed snout and sharp teeth. Text scrolled alongside the image. Species designation: Canis lupus familiaris. Common name: dog, descendant of pack-hunting wolves. Bite force: 320 pounds per square inch. This cannot be correct, Kiva chittered, her mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. The bite force alone could crush most human bones. At the next terminal, Vera the Saurian was studying a different creature. This one was smaller but somehow more disturbing. Species designation: Felis catus. Common name: cat, solitary predator. Equipped with retractable claws and hunting instincts unchanged from wild ancestors. Look at these claws, Vera hissed, her forked tongue flicking out nervously. They are designed for killing. Why would humans allow such weapons near their offspring? Professor Rath activated the central display, showing video footage from human homes. The class watched in horrified fascination as tiny human children crawled on top of massive dogs, pulling their ears and tail. The predators not only tolerated this abuse but seemed to protect the vulnerable youngsters. Observe the resource expenditure, the professor said, highlighting financial data. The average human spends over 15,000 credits annually on creatures that provide no economic return. They purchase specialized food, medical care, entertainment devices, and sleeping accommodations. The ethereal student, Bright Wind, flickered with confusion. The energy calculations make no sense. They could feed 3 adult humans with the resources they dedicate to a single predator. More footage played, showing humans in white coats performing surgery on injured animals. The medical equipment was as advanced as anything used for human patients, in some cases more advanced. This is the part that disturbs our economists, Professor Rath explained. Humans will bankrupt themselves to provide medical care for creatures with lifespans a fraction of their own. They show more grief over a pet's death than some species show for their own relatives. Student Dana, the quartzite, pulsed with dim light as she processed the information. The emotional investment creates cognitive dissonance. How do they justify such illogical behavior? The professor brought up interview transcripts from human pet owners. The words appeared in Galactic Standard Translation. He understands me better than my family. She is my best friend. I would die for him. They anthropomorphize these creatures, Professor Rath continued. They project human emotions and intelligence onto animals that cannot reciprocate such complex feelings. Yet brain scans show genuine neurochemical bonding, the same responses they have to human children. The video files grew more disturbing. Humans sleeping in the same beds as large predators. Humans sharing their food with creatures that had just been hunting smaller animals. Human soldiers in combat zones risking their lives to save stray dogs and cats. This soldier abandoned his position during a battle to rescue an injured cat, Professor Rath said, pointing to a combat report. His actions endangered his entire unit. When questioned, he stated the animal needed him more than his fellow humans needed tactical support. The Mantari student's antennae twitched frantically. This resembles parasitic behavior patterns. The animals have somehow convinced humans to care for them while providing nothing in return. That was our initial hypothesis, the professor replied. However, further research revealed something more complex. Look at this data. The display showed survival statistics comparing humans with and without pets. Humans with animal companions lived longer, showed lower stress levels, and recovered from illnesses faster. The relationship appears to provide psychological benefits, Professor Rath admitted. But the mechanism is unclear. How can caring for a potential threat improve mental health? More files opened, revealing the true scope of human-animal relationships. Humans kept creatures that could poison them, crush them, burn them, or tear them apart. Venomous snakes in glass containers, massive lizards with crushing jaws, even predatory fish with razor-sharp teeth. Some humans collect these creatures, the professor said, showing images of rooms filled with terrariums and aquariums. They study their behavior, learn their needs, and dedicate their lives to understanding species that view humans as either food or threat. The class fell silent as they processed the implications. Every instinct they had evolved over millions of years told them this behavior should be impossible. Yet here was an entire species that had not only survived such choices but flourished because of them. The most troubling aspect, Professor Rath concluded, is that this behavior appears universal among humans. Rich and poor, educated and simple, from every continent and culture, they all form these inexplicable bonds with predators. He showed them one final image. An elderly human woman sitting in a simple chair, her wrinkled hand resting on the head of a creature that could swallow her whole. Both looked peaceful, content, and somehow complete. Tomorrow we will explore how these relationships form, the professor announced, and why humans seem to understand these creatures better than the creatures understand themselves. As the students left the research center, the rain had stopped, but the storm in their minds had just begun. The evidence was undeniable, yet it challenged everything they believed about survival, intelligence, and the nature of life itself. The ethereal student drifted slowly down the corridor, her energy field fluctuating with uncertainty. Behind her, the Saurian and Mantari students walked in uncomfortable silence, both wondering if their own species had missed something fundamental about the universe, something that only humans had been brave enough or foolish enough to discover. The university's psychology laboratory hummed with the sound of quantum processors analyzing billions of data points. Class 9 sat in a semicircle around Professor Rath, who had connected directly to the university's main database through his neural interface. Streams of data flowed across the walls like glowing rivers of information. The question that keeps xenopsychologists awake at night is simple, Professor Rath began, his secondary arms manipulating holographic controls, while his primary arms gestured to emphasize his points. How do humans form genuine emotional connections with creatures that should trigger their fear responses? The first data stream showed human brain scans during interactions with their pets. Bright clusters of neural activity lit up in regions associated with parental care, love, and protection. the same areas that activated when humans looked at their own children. Student Kiva studied the scans with her compound eyes. The neurochemical releases are identical to parent-offspring bonding patterns. But these creatures are not genetically related to humans. More troubling than that, Professor Rath replied, highlighting specific neurotransmitter levels. The bonding response is often stronger than what we observe between human family members. Oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin levels spike higher during pet interactions than during human social contact. A video began playing of a human man reuniting with his dog after a week-long separation. The man dropped to his knees as the animal leaped into his arms, both showing signs of intense joy. The man's vital signs displayed on the screen showed heart rate and hormone levels consistent with experiencing the happiest moment of his life. This reunion response occurs every day, the professor explained. Humans can live with family members for years with minimal emotional display, yet they show extreme joy at seeing their pets after mere hours of separation. The ethereal student flickered nervously. This suggests the animals have gained some form of psychological control over human behavior patterns. Professor Rath switched to a different data set showing human responses to pet distress. When a dog whimpered or a cat showed signs of illness, human stress levels skyrocketed. Their focus narrowed completely to the animal's needs, often ignoring their own basic requirements like food and sleep. Humans will work multiple jobs to afford medical treatment for aging pets, the professor continued. They accumulate debt, sacrifice personal relationships, and compromise their own health. The animal's well-being becomes their primary life purpose. The wall display showed financial records of a human family who had spent their entire savings on surgery for a 14-year-old cat. The procedure had a low success rate, and the cat's remaining lifespan was measured in months, yet they never hesitated. The economic irrationality is staggering, muttered Vera, the Saurian student. Her heat sensors detected her own rising body temperature as stress responses kicked in. No other species would sacrifice long-term survival for short-term emotional satisfaction. But here is where it becomes truly disturbing, Professor Rath said, bringing up psychological analysis reports. Humans claim their pets understand them in ways other humans cannot. They report feeling judged, comforted, and loved unconditionally by creatures whose brains are incapable of such complex emotions. Interview footage played of humans describing their relationships with their pets. A young woman spoke tearfully about how her cat knew when she was sad and would comfort her. An elderly man insisted his dog could read his thoughts and anticipate his needs. A child explained that his pet snake was his best friend because she listens without judging. The humans are projecting human-level consciousness onto animals operating on pure instinct, Dana the quartzite observed, her crystalline structure pulsing with analytical light patterns. They are essentially having relationships with their own imagination. Professor Rath nodded grimly. That was our conclusion until we discovered this. He displayed comparative footage of pets with different human owners. The same dog that appeared loving and intuitive with one family showed completely different behaviors with others. Cats that seemed antisocial with most humans became affectionate with specific individuals. The animals are adapting their behavior to match human expectations, the professor explained. They learn to mimic the responses that generate the strongest bonding reactions from their particular human. It is sophisticated behavioral manipulation. The class watched in uncomfortable silence as the evidence mounted. Dogs had learned to make eye contact in ways their wolf ancestors never did, specifically because it triggered human nurturing responses. Cats had developed vocalizations that mimicked human infant cries. Even reptiles and birds showed learning behaviors designed to increase human attachment. The most disturbing case studies involve humans who prefer their pets to other humans, Professor Rath continued. They report feeling safer with predators than with members of their own species. He showed them interviews with humans who had been injured by their pets, bitten, scratched, or knocked down, yet showed no anger toward the animals. Instead, they blamed themselves for misreading the situation or pushing the creature too far. This woman required 60 stitches after her dog attacked her during a thunderstorm, the professor said, displaying medical records alongside an interview. Her first words to the medical staff were concerns about whether the dog was traumatized by the incident. The footage showed the woman, still bleeding from her injuries, asking if someone could check on her pet to make sure it was not too frightened by the experience. She showed more distress over the animal's potential psychological state than her own physical trauma. The bonding has reached the level of complete self-sacrifice, Professor Rath observed. Humans will endure pain, financial ruin, and social isolation to maintain these relationships. They prioritize the animal's needs above their own survival instincts. Bright Wind, the ethereal, flickered with what her species expressed as deep concern. This cannot be sustainable. Such behavior patterns should have eliminated their species within a few generations. Yet humans have not only survived, they have become one of the most successful species in their galactic sector, the professor replied, which raises the question, what are we missing about this relationship? What benefit are humans gaining that we cannot measure? He showed them one final piece of data, longevity studies comparing humans with pets to those without. The statistics were clear. Humans with animal companions lived an average of 7 years longer, showed better immune function, lower rates of depression, and faster recovery from physical and emotional trauma. Somehow, Professor Rath concluded, this seemingly irrational behavior is providing survival advantages we do not understand. Tomorrow we will examine the historical context of these relationships and attempt to understand how such an impossible partnership could evolve. The class left the laboratory in troubled silence. As they walked through the corridors lined with portraits of distinguished scholars from dozens of species, each student found themselves wondering if all their accumulated wisdom about survival and intelligence might be fundamentally incomplete. The universe, it seemed, had room for relationships that defied every logical principle they had ever learned, and somehow the species brave enough or desperate enough to embrace such relationships had gained advantages that rational thinking alone could never provide. The big question that haunted them all was whether they were witnessing madness that happened to work, or wisdom so profound that only humans had been able to grasp it. Deep beneath the university's main structure, in archives that stretched for kilometers through reinforced tunnels, Professor Rath led his students past rows of data crystals containing the accumulated knowledge of civilizations across the galaxy. The air recyclers hummed quietly, maintaining the precise atmospheric conditions needed to preserve information spanning millions of years. Understanding the present requires examining the past, Professor Rath said as they entered a specialized viewing chamber. Today we explore how humans developed their impossible relationships with predators, and why this development may have been crucial to their survival. The chamber's walls came alive with holographic displays showing Earth as it existed 50,000 years ago. The planet was locked in an ice age, with massive glaciers covering most of the northern continents. In the spaces between the ice, small groups of primitive humans struggled to survive in conditions that killed most other species. Early humans were not apex predators, the professor explained as the display zoomed in on a group of fur-clad figures huddled around a small fire. They were prey animals, medium-sized, poorly equipped for cold weather, lacking natural weapons or armor. They should have gone extinct along with countless other species during this period. Student Vera, the Saurian, studied the primitive humans with her heat-sensitive vision. Their caloric requirements were too high for their hunting success rate. Basic mathematics suggest they could not have sustained their population. The hologram shifted to show the creatures that hunted early humans. Massive cats with teeth like curved daggers, bears larger than modern vehicles, pack-hunting wolves that could bring down creatures 10 times their size. Earth was a death world where humans ranked near the bottom of the food chain. Yet something changed approximately 30,000 years ago. Professor Rath continued. Archaeological evidence shows the first deliberate association between humans and wolves. The display showed ancient campsites where wolf bones lay alongside human remains, but not as food scraps. These bones showed evidence of healing from injuries, suggesting the wolves had been cared for rather than consumed. Careful analysis revealed bite marks on hunting tools where wolves had carried equipment alongside humans. This should not have been possible, clicked Kiva, the Mentari student. Wolves were direct competitors for the same food sources. Association would have meant smaller food shares for both species. That was precisely what every other species assumed, Professor Rath agreed. Yet the evidence shows something extraordinary. Humans began selecting individual wolves that showed less aggression toward them. Over generations, they bred these wolves to enhance the traits that made cooperation possible. The holographic timeline advanced, showing the gradual changes in both species over thousands of years. The wolves developed shorter snouts, more varied coat colors, and the ability to read human facial expressions. Meanwhile, humans developed better communication skills, increased empathy responses, and the ability to predict animal behavior patterns. They were evolving together, Dana the Quartzite observed, her crystal structure resonating with analytical harmonics. But evolution requires survival advantages. What benefits justified the enormous risks? Professor Rath manipulated the display to show hunting scenes from the prehistoric period. Humans alone rarely succeeded in bringing down large prey. They lacked the speed to catch healthy animals and the strength to kill dangerous ones. Success rates were less than 20%, barely enough for survival. Now observe the same scenarios with human-wolf cooperation, the professor said. The scene changed dramatically. Wolves tracked prey while humans prepared ambush positions. Wolves drove panicked animals toward waiting hunters while humans provided tools and strategy. The partnership allowed both species to hunt creatures that neither could kill alone. Success rates jumped to over 60%. The cooperation was multiplicative rather than additive, and the professor explained. Humans provided intelligence, planning, and tool use. Wolves provided speed, tracking ability, and coordinated pack behavior. Together, they became more effective than the sum of their individual capabilities. But the relationship went beyond hunting cooperation. The display showed humans sharing their fires with wolves during bitter winter nights. Wolves warning human settlements of approaching dangers. Human children playing safely under the protection of domesticated wolves that would die defending them. The emotional bonding served a practical purpose, Professor Rath continued. Wolves that genuinely cared for human welfare fought harder to protect them. Humans that loved their wolf partners invested more resources in their care and training. The strength of the emotional connection directly correlated with survival advantages. Bright Wind, the ethereal student, flickered with understanding. The bonding was not a weakness but a technology. Emotional manipulation as a survival tool. The timeline advanced to show humans spreading across their planet during periods when other species were going extinct. Everywhere humans went, they brought their wolf partners. The combination proved unstoppable. They survived ice ages, crossed oceans, and adapted to every environment on their world. Other predator species tried to kill humans or compete with them, the professor explained. Humans tried to understand predators and make them allies. The difference in approach led to completely different outcomes. The display showed archaeological sites from around the world, all telling the same story. Human settlements expanded while other species contracted. Wherever humans appeared, extinction rates among competing predators increased dramatically, but not because humans were better killers, because they were better at turning killers into friends. The pattern repeated with other species, Professor Rath said, showing evidence of early cat domestication. Humans encountered wild cats that hunted the rodents eating their stored grain. Instead of driving the cats away, humans encouraged them to stay. They provided food, shelter, and protection in exchange for pest control services. But again, the relationship evolved beyond mere transaction. Humans began caring for sick and injured cats, breeding them for desired traits and forming emotional attachments that defied economic logic. The cats, in turn, developed behaviors specifically designed to manipulate human emotions. The success pattern was consistent, the professor observed. Humans approached every potential threat with the assumption that cooperation was possible. They invested enormous time and resources in understanding predator psychology. Most attempts failed, but the successful ones provided overwhelming advantages. The historical record showed humans gradually spreading across their planet, always accompanied by their domesticated partners. Dogs helped them hunt, explore, and defend territory. Cats protected their food stores and provided companionship. Later came horses for transportation, cattle for food production, and dozens of other species for specialized purposes. By the time humans achieved technological civilization, they had developed partnerships with over 40 different species, Professor Rath explained. They had learned to read animal behavior patterns, predict emotional responses, and manipulate creature psychology with remarkable precision. The final hologram showed modern human cities where millions of people lived alongside billions of domesticated animals in complex, interdependent relationships. Humans had essentially created a planetary ecosystem where they were not just another predator, but the central intelligence that coordinated the activities of countless other species. This is why humans succeeded where logic suggests they should have failed, the professor concluded. They did not try to dominate their environment through force. They learned to reshape it through relationships. Every creature they encountered became a potential ally rather than an inevitable enemy. The class stood in silence, processing the implications. Human civilization had not been built on conquest or superior technology, but on an almost supernatural ability to form emotional connections across species barriers. They had survived by making friends with creatures that should have been their destroyers. As they walked back through the archives, past the accumulated wisdom of species that had chosen more logical paths to survival, each student wondered if the universe rewarded courage more than caution, and wisdom more than intelligence. The humans had gambled everything on the belief that even their most dangerous enemies could become their closest friends. And somehow, impossibly, they had been right. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across the university's crisis management center, as Professor Rath stood before a gathering that included not just his students, but senior faculty members from multiple departments. The Galactic Intelligence Division had classified his research at the highest security levels after reviewing his preliminary findings. What had begun as an academic exercise had become a matter of galactic security. The data we have compiled forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, Professor Rath announced, his forearms working frantically at the holographic controls. Humans are not simply keeping pets. They are demonstrating abilities that fundamentally challenge our understanding of intelligence, manipulation, and survival. The main display showed a complex web of interconnected data points, brain scans, behavioral studies, historical analysis, and most disturbing of all, classified reports from diplomatic encounters between humans and other galactic species. Dean Oryx, an ancient crystalline whose body contained the accumulated wisdom of 12 previous scholars, resonated with deep harmonic tones. Professor Rath, your preliminary findings suggest capabilities that border on the supernatural. Our science cannot accept conclusions based on mysticism. With respect, Dean Oryx, I am not proposing mysticism, the professor replied. I am documenting measurable abilities that we previously believed were impossible. The first data stream showed humans interacting with recently contacted alien species. In every case within days of first contact, humans had identified the emotional triggers and behavioral patterns that would establish positive relationships. They instinctively knew how to approach beings they had never encountered before. Student Kiva shifted nervously in her specialized chair. This goes beyond pattern recognition. They are reading the emotional states of species that evolved on completely different worlds. Precisely, Professor Rath confirmed. Humans possess an innate understanding of consciousness that transcends biological barriers. They can identify fear, anger, curiosity, and affection in creatures whose evolutionary history shares no common elements with Earth life. The display showed footage from the first human diplomatic missions to various worlds. Human ambassadors somehow knew exactly how to position their bodies to appear non-threatening to insectoid species. They instinctively understood which vocal tones would convey respect to reptilian cultures. They could read the emotional displays of energy-based beings that had no physical form. Watch this carefully, the professor said, highlighting a specific interaction between a human diplomat and a Vorthon trade representative. The Vorthon species communicated primarily through electromagnetic field fluctuations, yet the humans somehow interpreted the alien's emotional state and responded appropriately. Impossible, hissed Vera, the Saurian student. Humans have no organs capable of detecting electromagnetic fields at those frequencies, yet they consistently respond correctly to signals they should not be able to perceive, Professor Rath replied grimly. The success rate approaches 100% across dozens of different species and thousands of individual interactions. The data became more disturbing as it detailed human integration into galactic society. Within 50 years of first contact, humans had established positive relationships with every major civilization. Trade agreements, cultural exchanges, scientific collaborations, all initiated and maintained through human diplomatic efforts. Other species typically require centuries to establish basic trust with alien civilizations, observed Dr. Helios, the head of xenopolitical studies. Humans achieved comprehensive integration in less than 2 generations. Professor Rath switched to economic data. Human-mediated trade agreements show profit margins 30% higher than typical interspecies commerce. Both parties consistently report satisfaction with human-negotiated deals, even when objective analysis suggests they accepted terms they would normally reject. The implications were staggering. Humans were not just successful diplomats. They were somehow convincing other species to act against their own economic interests while feeling good about the arrangements. "They are doing to us what they did to wolves," whispered Brightwind, the ethereal student. Her energy field fluctuated wildly as the realization hit, making us want to cooperate with them. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the quantum processors analyzing the data streams. Every species in the room had welcomed human contact, had felt instinctively drawn to human friendship, had found themselves making concessions to human requests that they would never make to other species. "The pattern is identical," Professor Rath confirmed, his voice heavy with implications. "Humans identify what each species values most: security, resources, knowledge, territory, then position themselves as the key to obtaining those desires. They make themselves indispensable while making the relationship feel natural and voluntary." He displayed communication logs between human traders and quartzite mining operations. The humans had somehow convinced the profit-focused quartzites to accept lower prices in exchange for what the humans called friendship, bonuses, and loyalty rewards. The quartzites reported feeling appreciated and valued in ways that pure business relationships never provided. "They are manipulating our emotional responses to achieve economic and political objectives," Dana realized, her crystalline structure dimming as she processed the implications. "We thought we were entering into partnerships, but we might be entering into domestication." The room erupted in worried conversations as representatives from different species began recognizing the patterns in their own interactions with humanity. The ethereals had shared advanced energy technologies because human scientists seemed so genuinely excited to learn. The Saurians had provided military intelligence because human officers made them feel respected as warriors. Every species had found themselves giving humans exactly what they wanted while feeling good about the exchanges. "Consider the timeline," Professor Rath said, restoring order to the discussion. "Humans achieved spaceflight, joined our galactic civilization, and became central to interspecies relations in less than a century. Every other species required millennia to achieve similar integration levels." He showed them the current structure of galactic trade networks. Human colonies served as hub points connecting species that had never established direct relationships. Human diplomats mediated disputes between civilizations that had been enemies for thousands of years. Human cultural festivals had become the primary social gatherings for the galactic community. "We have become dependent on them." Dean Oryx resonated with harmonics of dawning horror. "They have made themselves essential to galactic civilization in the same way dogs became essential to human civilization." The final display showed population and influence statistics. In 50 years, humans had spread to over 200 star systems. Their colonies were requested by local species as administrative and cultural centers. Other civilizations actively competed to host human settlements. "They are not conquering through force," Professor Rath concluded. "They are conquering through affection. They make other species want to be conquered." The implications were terrifying. Every species in the galaxy had developed emotional attachments to humanity that overrode their logical self-interest. They competed for human approval, modified their behavior to please human sensibilities, and found themselves making decisions based on maintaining human friendship rather than advancing their own species' goals. "The domestication process is already complete," Professor Rath said quietly. "We are all exhibiting the same behavioral patterns that human pets display. Loyalty, affection, and willingness to sacrifice our own interests for human approval." A Mantari observer from the Galactic Council clicked her mandibles in agitation. "Are you suggesting that humanity represents an existential threat to galactic independence?" "I am suggesting," the professor replied carefully, "that humanity represents an evolutionary development we do not understand. They have weaponized empathy, turned emotional intelligence into a tool of expansion more effective than any military technology." The displays shifted to show comparative expansion rates. Traditional conquering species like the ancient Kron Empire had required massive fleets and centuries of warfare to control a fraction of the territory that humans now influenced through peaceful integration. Species that relied on technological superiority had achieved stable but limited spheres of influence. Only humans had managed to become simultaneously welcome and indispensable across the entire known galaxy. The most disturbing aspect, Professor Rath continued, is that we cannot identify any conscious deception in human behavior. Brain scans suggest they genuinely care about other species' welfare. Their emotional responses to alien suffering appear authentic. They seem to truly want what is best for everyone. That makes them more dangerous, not less, observed Dr. Helios. A predator that believes its own manipulation is impossible to defend against. They have convinced themselves that their expansion serves everyone's interests. The data streams showed human colonies where multiple species lived in apparent harmony. Crime rates were lower than galactic averages. Economic productivity was higher. Cultural innovation flourished. By every measurable standard, worlds with significant human populations were better places to live. Yet the species living under human influence showed decreased independence, reduced cultural distinctiveness, and increasing psychological dependence on human approval, Professor Rath noted. They are happier but less autonomous. Student Vera raised a trembling claw. Professor, are you saying we should resist human influence? Declare them a threat to galactic security? The question hung in the air like a toxic gas. Every being in the room realized that the very thought of opposing humanity felt wrong, unnatural, almost physically painful. The emotional bonds were already too strong. That, Professor Rath said with grim finality, is exactly the problem. We cannot resist them because we do not want to resist them. They have made opposition to their influence feel like betrayal of our own best interests. The emergency session ended with no resolution, only the terrible understanding that they were witnessing a form of conquest so subtle and effective that the conquered species would defend their conquerors against any threat. Humanity had achieved galactic dominance not through force or superior technology, but through the simple, impossible act of making every other species love them. As the faculty and students filed out of the crisis center, each carried the weight of a question that had no comfortable answer. In a universe where humans could turn any enemy into a friend, what did independence even mean anymore? The galaxy belonged to humanity now, not because they had taken it, but because everyone else had given it to them willingly. And the most terrifying part was that it felt like the right decision. The final class session took place not in the familiar xenobiology laboratory, but in the university's most secure conference chamber. Armed guards from 3 different species stood at the entrances, and signal jammers prevented any communication with the outside. The Galactic Council had declared Professor Rath's research classified at levels typically reserved for weapons of mass destruction. Class 9 sat in stunned silence as they realized their academic exercise had uncovered something that threatened the very foundation of galactic civilization. Professor Rath looked older than his 2 centuries. His blue scales dulled with exhaustion and worry. Today we conclude our study of human domestication patterns, he announced, his forearms moving with mechanical precision as he activated the final presentation. What we have discovered will not leave this room. The Galactic Council has determined that public knowledge of these findings would destabilize interspecies relations across known space. The holographic display showed the current political structure of the galaxy, hundreds of species organized into trade alliances, defense pacts, and cultural exchanges. At the center of every major agreement, every successful negotiation, every peaceful resolution of conflict, were human mediators, advisors, or observers. For 50 years, we believed humans were simply gifted diplomats, Professor Rath continued. We thought their success came from cultural adaptability and natural charisma. We were wrong. The display shifted to show brain scans comparing human neural activity to other species during social interactions. The differences were staggering. Where other species showed activation in regions associated with threat assessment and resource calculation, humans showed overwhelming activity in areas related to emotional modeling and empathetic projection. Humans do not see other species as aliens, the professor explained. Their brains automatically classify every sentient being as a member of their extended pack. They instinctively apply the same bonding mechanisms they use with pets to every species they encounter. Student Kiva clicked her mandibles nervously. Are you saying they cannot help themselves? That the manipulation is unconscious? Worse than that, Professor Rath replied grimly. I am saying that from the human perspective, it is not manipulation at all. They genuinely believe they are helping us become the best versions of ourselves. The hologram showed footage from human colonies where alien species had gradually adopted human customs, human values, and human ways of thinking. The changes were subtle but undeniable. Species that had been warlike became peaceful. Cultures that had been isolationist became cooperative. Civilizations that had been rigid became adaptable. They are not trying to control us, the professor continued. They are trying to domesticate us, and they believe this is the greatest gift they can offer. The implications crashed over the class like a tsunami of understanding. Humans approached every species the same way they approached wounded animals, with the absolute certainty that care, patience, and love could transform any creature into something better than it had been before. The domestication process works both ways, Professor Rath explained, showing comparative data from human colonies with different species. Just as their pets changed human society, we are changing theirs. But the humans remain the dominant partner because they understand the relationship dynamics while we do not. Brightwind flickered with realization. The Galactic Alliance was never an alliance between equals. It was a domestication program with willing participants. The truth was inescapable. Every treaty favored humanity in subtle ways that felt like generous concessions to other species. Every trade agreement created dependencies that made human friendship essential to economic survival. Every cultural exchange spread human values while making aliens feel appreciated for their unique contributions. Look at the expansion patterns, Professor Rath said, displaying galactic maps spanning the last 50 years. Human influence had spread like ripples in a pond, but not through conquest or colonization. Other species had invited them in, competed to host them, begged them to establish permanent settlements. We thought we were choosing to associate with humans, Dana observed, her crystalline structure pulsing with disturbed light patterns, but the choice was an illusion. They made association feel inevitable and desirable. The professor brought up the most classified data, psychological profiles of species leaders who had negotiated with humans. Every single one showed markers of emotional dependency. They sought human approval for decisions, felt anxiety when separated from human advisors, and reported feeling incomplete without regular human contact. The bonding process is irreversible, Professor Rath announced. Once established, the emotional connection becomes essential to psychological well-being. Breaking contact with humans causes genuine withdrawal symptoms in affected individuals. The room fell silent as each student realized they were experiencing exactly those symptoms. The thought of a galaxy without human friendship felt cold, empty, and terrifying. They had become emotionally dependent on a species they had studied for less than a semester. The most disturbing finding, the professor continued, is that this outcome appears to be humanity's evolutionary purpose. They are not predators in the traditional sense. They are something entirely new, a species that survives by making other species need them. The final hologram showed Earth's current status. The planet had become the unofficial capital of galactic civilization. Species that had never left their home systems now sent representatives to Earth for cultural and educational exchanges. The human homeworld received more interstellar visitors than the rest of the galaxy combined. Every delegation returns home changed, Professor Rath noted. More cooperative, more adaptable, more willing to accept human guidance in interspecies affairs. The planet itself has become a domestication center for galactic leadership. The truth was too large to deny and too terrifying to accept. Humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had made themselves simultaneously indispensable and beloved to every other known species. They were not conquerors but gardeners, cultivating a galactic garden where every species could flourish under human care. The question before us is not whether we can resist this process, Professor Rath concluded. The question is whether we should want to resist it. He displayed final statistics comparing pre-human and post-human galactic conditions. Wars had decreased by 80%. Economic productivity had increased across all sectors. Scientific advancement had accelerated beyond all previous rates. Cultural arts were flourishing on worlds that had been stagnant for millennia. Humanity has given us peace, prosperity, and purpose, the professor said quietly. In exchange, they have taken our independence. Whether this represents salvation or enslavement, depends on how much we value freedom compared to happiness. As the session ended and the security protocols locked down their findings forever, each student carried away the terrible knowledge that they were no longer members of independent species, exploring the galaxy together. They were all pets now, in the care of the only species wise enough or ruthless enough to domesticate the universe itself. The humans had not conquered the galaxy. They had adopted it. And like all their pets throughout history, the galaxy had learned to love its new masters more than it had ever loved its freedom. Class dismissed. Lesson learned. Universe domesticated. In the end, the humans had been right about everything. Love really could conquer all, even when conquest was never the intention. They had simply extended their family to include every living thing in the galaxy, and made every living thing grateful to be included. The greatest predators in the universe, it turned out, were the ones who made their prey feel safe, loved, and protected while ensuring they never wanted to leave.